gone back again because the devices are so powerful that you run huge applications on the phone, huge games on the phone. So now there's a programming model that's very client-centric, and the role of the server is sort of relegated to be, if I want some data, I'll ask you for some data, and that's about it. And maybe the initial URL, which pulls down all the JavaScript into the phone. And then the JavaScript's running, and then if it wants to know the current stock price in New York, it might make a call to a server. And there are people that have views that the original web protocols were really correct, and we should not have invented all these high-level protocols that sit on top of it. And there's something they call REST interface. And the REST interface, to the best of my knowledge, says, in effect, the only call that a client should make to a server is they should make a get or a put. I think there's a delete. And what are some? There's like two others, and that's it.
Post.
Huh?
Post.
Post. Yeah, thank you.
Post. Is there a put?
Yes. And the idea is these should be stateless, which means you can call get, and then you're done. The server doesn't remember you. Whatever you got. That's the end of it. And these should be very short in time. You don't make a call and wait 10 minutes. And this represents then, on the server, what you expose is what they call a RESTful API, which means the whole interface to the server is responding to these simple, low-level HTTP protocol commands. And there are a huge number of people programming who believe that strongly. I don't know for a fact, but I suspect, the majority of people at Facebook and Twitter and Google and places like that, people that are dealing with millions of devices probably think that way. So it turns out that this has, again, it's not clear that it's evolved, but it's been extended. And there's another version of ASP. So we had ASP, which was, what it was HTML with little snippets of C# code stuck in the middle. Just like in the old days, you stuck JavaScript right in the middle of the HTML. And then the world said, oh, that's terrible, don't do that. Put it in a separate file. So then we had separate HTML, and then we had a CSS file, and we had a JavaScript file, and the HTML would reference those, right? So ASP did the same thing. We came out with ASPX, and ASPX put it in that little C# file that we've grown to love, and now it's, quote, pure HTML plus a file. When they went back to this model, they literally went backwards or forwards, depending which way you go. So now in the MVC model, these little inserts here were called ASP. You literally would put an ASP tag in your code and then write some C# code. There's something new now. It's called Razor. And to use Razor, it's an @ sign and maybe just an @ sign, or it might be an @ sign in one of those, I forget. Okay. And again, you put in C# code, and it's in line with the HTML, which is like the weather in Seattle. If you don't like it, wait a few days, it'll change. We'll go back and forth. Okay. So anyhow, MVC uses this thing called Razor, and again, the focus on ASPX was expecting to literally generate the forms and do lots of work, okay? The model we've gone to now is you really don't do form processing. You don't draw the screens on the server and then send them down. Instead, what you do is you send down a giant chunk of JavaScript, and typically these things are called single-page applications. And the JavaScript sits there, and it rewrites parts of its own screen, or it replaces the whole screen, and it runs and it runs and it runs and it runs. And it's not going back to the server like we did with our DVD store. give me the next DVD, I want to buy a DVD, constantly going up to get another page. It spends its whole time sitting down here spinning and spinning and spinning. And occasionally, if it needs a piece of data, it'll make a call up and get it, or it might even be modern enough to use the ASP API, which we will get into in the fall when we get into the 422 class. Okay, so I'm not going to go through this again and use the same slides I had 117, but again, it describes this differentiation between logically dividing your code, which is viewed by everybody today as the right way of doing it. I mean, it's the whole object-oriented model is isolation, isolation, isolation. So, in fact, this says divide your code up into 3 parts. Okay, well, not only that, I mean, like, your model should be divided up into little subclasses and sub-objects, right? The more small pieces you can put together, the more you isolate errors, the more reusable the code is.
Theoretically, does that make your code run any faster, putting it in smaller chunks?
It typically doesn't, because the compiler says, oh, thank you very much, that was a nice idea, and it does it all over. It's like when I cook, okay? I get all the ingredients out on the table, and I get ready to mix it, and my wife comes in and pushes to the side, and then she redoes the whole thing, okay? You're telling the compiler in one language or another, in one structure, what you want it to do. And then it goes through many times and it optimizes and says, oh yeah, I'll just shove all this together in one binary. I'm overstating that. There are performance considerations, but not like you might think. So one thing I want to highlight here is I'm going to force you to write an MVC app here. That's where we're going with this, because I want you to be familiar with that technology. You can actually write a new MVC app and use the new Razor View engines, or you can actually use an ASPX form and still do the same MVC and run it in the same environment, which is nice. In fact, you can mix. You can have your website, depending on the URL that the person selects, some of it will be served by ASPX and some of it will be served by MVC. And in fact, you can actually have all 3. Some of it can be the API. You get them all mixed together, which is really good. It let people evolve old coding to new gracefully. It has something called layouts, and layouts do exactly the same thing that does a master page does. You define a layout for your Razor pages, which puts headings and trailers and sets fonts and has all your includes for your JavaScript code. And then all your other pages use that like a template, and they insert themselves, just like we did with master pages. So that concept is there. The names have changed. We're going to use so little Razor, I'm not going to spend any time talking about it. It is server-side code. So here's 3 examples of code. Razor, PHP, which I know not, and this is the old classic ASP that it started with. Okay? So in all of these cases, you're trying to generate an HTML unordered list. Right? So in the ASP days, you would say unordered list, which is an HTML statement, and then this little symbol said, hey, this is C# code. Execute this and do it before you send the page down. And this would build a loop that would go 10 times, and each time through the loop, it would insert HTML, and then it would close it, and then it would close the unordered list. So this would write out in HTML, whatever, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or something like that. That's what it would generate. So you're using C# code to generate HTML. And that's the PHP thing, which pretty much is identical. And now in Razor, it is just a little @ sign, and you have to put the @ sign in front of the I when you use it, but they're really very, very similar. So again, if you wind up in a job where they're using PHP, don't freak out. The concepts are the same. They just changed all the names. Now, we'll get into this big time in the fall. But in the same way that when you were using ASPX, you could grab the toolbox and you could drag in a data list. You use SQL objects. You could drag in all these big chunks of code, a calendar, an ASP calendar, whatever you wanted. There's big chunks of code that are Razor that are pre-written for you. So you don't have to write everything. You want a grid, you want graphics, you want to do Google Analytics, you want to integrate with Facebook, Twitter, how to send a mail. There's pre-written Razor libraries, you just drag them in, and they're called helpers. So don't read the fine print here. Mostly I just want to use the diagram here. And this is central to understanding what's going to happen. If you write a simple app with one controller and one view and maybe one model, it's not so important. But as soon as you get model, it becomes really important. The URL that you go against from the client to interface with a website that's an MVC website is you'll go against this thing called a controller. And the controller is literally, and I'm not exaggerating this, it is an object and it has methods. Now, instead of calling them methods, they call them actions, but the words are totally synonymous. Well, when you label it as an action, it looks to you like a method, but it lets C# know that it has extra capability, so they're not really synonyms, but you should think of it as it's just a method. So what you expose on the web are a series of URLs, and what you're really exposing is a method. And that's what's so nice about it. You're writing an object-oriented. You're not like changing into a whole different structure. You're exposing your method on the web. And when they call your method, so they'll say /home/ telephone book /update, you'll go find a controller called home, and it'll have a method called phone book, and then that method takes one parameter, and it looks just like calling a method. So the way you call controllers looks just like writing object-oriented code. Now, this controller might want to, for instance, send back a list of data. So now these ones say ASPX rather than Razor. Again, you can write your views either way. This particular diagram is showing them with ASP. But in either case, what would do is you would have coded your method to say, oh, what that person wants is a list of phone numbers. So you will make a call to your model and say, give me the phone numbers. It'll return the phone numbers to you in some sort of a structure, a list or an object or something. And then you will pass that to a particular view, and that view will use that data, run the Razor, generate the HTML, and then that view will get shipped back to the user. And that's the flow. And there's a whole thing called routing, which it's really good if you learn it here, because it is very, very similar to how JavaScript apps work. When you write a single page app in JavaScript, one of the first pages you write it's a routing method. And then as the user clicks on thing, it goes back to the routing method and it draws a different screen. It draws a different screen. So this concept of routing is in both worlds. So if my website is called, that's the DNS name on the web that is my physical server is Kurt. Okay, and I'm serving up my website. This first thing that I type, home, is the name of a controller, which means it's the name of an object. So I might have an object called home, and I might have another object called photos, and they're objects just like you know. And then you write methods in, okay? So then, let's say you wrote a method in here that says welcome, and another one that said goodbye. And down here, you have a method called add, and another one called display. What the user types is, Kurt, which controller do they want? Do they want the home controller or the photo controller? What method do they want? Do they want the welcome? Or do they want the goodbye method? And then, if they want to pass up, like in the case of display, they want to say, give me 5 pictures. Then you add on to the end here, and you may say ID equal, I think there's a question mark that goes there, 5. And you can pass parameters, just like you would in URLs. So you'll see that the URL to an MVC app is literally the name of an object, the name of a method, and the parameters to pass into it. And in that regards, it's really simpler to program too. And there's a set of rules that says, for instance, if I just go to Kurt and I don't say anything, you're allowed to write routine rules which say, oh, if they don't say anything, send them here. And there's a whole bunch of combinations you can do for all kinds of fancy routing, but we won't get into it. It's a subject unto itself. This is an example of a controller. It's called products controller. And it has these things called controller actions. They're methods, public void categories. That just looks like a method. It is a method. Public void list, string int. Controller, detail, int, okay? So that's how you program to these things. Your interface to the world is an object-oriented interface. And that's a very desirable thing. And here's an example of a routing table. You specify in a particular file how you want URLs to be interpreted. You can change it. You can say, for instance, I want this to be the method and that to be the class. And you can say, I want 3 parameters, and 2 of them are optional. So you have a set of rules that says how to interpret a URL. If somebody serves this web server with a URL, it'll look in this definition and say, well, how do I interpret that? Yeah, that diagram is the same thing I did here. So what I want to do now is I want to go here and build this. We'll build one of these. So if you open up that website, saying over hyperlink, and you can close the PowerPoint because we're done with it. An updated version of this is available. Oh, now what are we going to do? Are we going to use a new one? Heck yeah. All right. Notice it says there's a new one. So click on that link and let's go on to the new one. This is really shocking. This has nothing to do with this course, but you're in the computer business, so maybe you'll find it interesting. This was written by some bozo named Scott Guthrie. Does anybody know who Scott Guthrie is? You do. He's like second in line at Microsoft. The guy's worth more than this college, I'm sure. He is such a like he kept getting promoted and like he drove the whole ASPX story. Now he owns the whole Azure cloud, and you know he's managing thousands of people. You'll see he's on the news. He's in a different city every 3 days, and he's still writing code and he's still writing articles. It just blows my mind. It blows my mind. Anyhow, so let's go here.
And his tutorials like make sense. That you think being such a nerd it'd be confusing, but like everything I read of his is pretty straightforward.
He's very nicely articulate as well. I trust my kids to take a class from him, definitely. I wouldn't send my puppies and kittens to live with that.